Chair, Councillor Jones, I can confirm that the live feed's now, live stream's now working. Thank you. Councillor Jones?
Want to get me? That's it. Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're fine.
Yeah,
yes, you're
you.
good to
Good
go.
morning,
You can commence
everyone.
me. Thank you.
Good morning. Are there any apologies, Alison, please?
I have no apologies, but if I can go through the attendance and if everyone can just acknowledge that they're here again, please, just for the record. And Councillor Clark?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Crumby?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Donoghue?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Dulston?
Here.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hazeldine?
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Cindy Hughes?
Morning, all.
Thank you. Councillor Jones, obviously, he's just said hello to everyone. Thank you. Councillor Lee?
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Nicholson?
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Scott, Andy Scott?
Yes, I'm here.
And Councillor Snedker?
Yes, I'm here, Alison.
Thank you. And the officers we've got present here, we've got Colin Dobson, Licensing Manager, we've got Brian Murray, Assistant Licensing Manager, Graham Hall, our Head of Community Service, and Bethany Simmons, our Principal Lawyer. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yes, thanks again. Good morning, everyone again. Item 2, any declarations of interest, please? No, a few shakes of the head. Good, thank you. Item 3, review of policies and conditions relating to hackney carriage, private hire vehicles and their drivers and operators. Colin, are you presenting this or is Brian doing it?
I'm presenting it, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time for this special meeting. It was one of logistics because of the timings that's required. We have been delayed because of COVID, possibly by about 3 months. So we're trying to get back on track. What I will say, it was quite fortunate because during that time we had some new guidelines issued from the Department of Transport, so we were able to incorporate those into the proposed policy. I'm going to put a presentation on now to talk through it. You'll be pleased to know that I'm not going to read through everything verbatim because there's a large amount of reading. However, today's meeting is more or less concentrating on the responses to the public consultation. I've put that on the screen now. Okay, this is to review the private hire and hackney carriage licensing policy and procedures. It's to invite members to support the final draft for approval by full council, which is 26th of November. The proposed changes are all within the document bundle at Appendix 1, and the draft policy is at Appendix 2. You see that on the electronic version, the changes are highlighted in red and blue. The red are the changes that we propose to make. The blue are the proposed changes. However, they are statutory from the Department of Transport. This is for implementation on the 1st of January 2021, which is why we're holding this special meeting. So a little bit about the taxi trade. When we refer to the taxi trade, we're talking about hackney carriages, private hire vehicles, within that hackney carriage drivers, private hire drivers and private hire operators. The subtle differences between them are hackney carriages can ply for hire, can pick people up off the streets and they can park on the taxi ranks, whereas private hire vehicles, they have to be pre-booked and they have operators to do that. The governance for this is through legislation. Key pieces of legislation are the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act of 1976, and the Town Police Clauses Act 1847. However, there's a multitude of other pieces of legislation which apply to taxis, such as Equality Act, human rights, things like that. We have bylaws which cover certain aspects of the taxi trade. What I mentioned earlier, the statutory standards, which we must comply with unless we've got compelling reason not to. From these, we develop our policies and procedures and conditions. But it must be noted that when we talk about conditions, we can't attach conditions to Hackney Carriage drivers' licences, and this is where we see bylaws coming in. There is a right of appeal for anyone who disagrees with any decisions made, and the policy review is a statutory requirement every 5 years. However, there is a requirement for interim reviews around about the 3-year period, just to ensure that the policy is still fit for purpose. However, if there are any major changes, then they will be brought to the committee at any time if it's seen necessary. Taxi licensing in Darlington, there's 161 Hackney Carriage vehicles, 7 of which are wheelchair accessible, 90 private hire vehicles, and 5 wheelchair. Of those, 5 are wheelchair accessible. We realise there are low numbers of wheelchair accessible vehicles, and it is something that we are constantly striving to develop. But we've got to bear in mind that these are businesses essentially, and it is difficult to ask drivers to spend extra money for the modifications for wheelchair accessible vehicles, and it is an issue, a nationwide issue. We have 166 Hackney Carriage drivers, 163 private hire drivers, and 106 combined. That's those with both Hackney Carriage and private hire driving licences. And we have 3 private hire operators. Any of the changes that are agreed will apply to new applications from the 1st of January 2021. There are licences can be granted for up to 3 years, so the changes will take effect when those licences are due for renewal. So following the approval by the Licensing Committee for public consultation, this went live during a period between 21st of August to the 2nd of October. What I did was it went on our website primarily with the proposed changes, but also I provided was a link to SurveyMonkey, trying to embrace new technology and try to make things quite straightforward for people to respond, and put a series of questions related to the proposed changes. They weren't all, the questions weren't all there, were limited to the amount of questions that we could ask, but also I was aware that putting too many questions might actually deter people from actually doing a survey, so it needed to be something quite quick. We had communications from our communications department issued through press releases, and also social media were regularly messages were put out by our communications team. We were able to benefit from a lot of personal contact with officers during the obviously the COVID regulations. There was a lot of inquiries from the taxi trade, so we had a lot of contact generally, but we also had officers who were going to the taxi ranks, speaking with the drivers to get the message out, not only for the COVID regulations, but also about the proposed changes in the policy. We also signposted stakeholders and other professional bodies to our website, where they could view and comment should they wish. I did mention the statutory taxi and private hire standards published by the Department of Transport, which were published in July. These were in response to national research and produced a document called Steps Towards a Safer and More Robust System. And in that there was key recommendations, and that was all about protecting children and vulnerable people. And it is statutory, and this is where I said about the writing that's in blue on the proposed policy. This is what has been proposed by the Department of Transport, and we've got to have a compelling reason not to follow those statutory standards. That's part of the reason as well why we're quite fortunate that we were able to put it out and consult on it at that time, rather than have to do it separately. So we've got our responses from SurveyMonkey. We also, within the contact details, were our direct contact details for licensing. From the responses, we received 36 from the Monkey survey, SurveyMonkey rather, and 16 responses were emailed directly to licensing. Initially, my thoughts were, well, they're quite low. However, on reflection, we did an awful lot of work actually before the consultation process started, and actually before we actually started redrafting the policy. So there's an awful lot of things in there which particularly the taxi trade were wanting us to include. So in terms of the responses, it may well reflect the fact that people are, I would hope to think, were generally happy with the proposals. And the 16 responses were a mixture. Some of those responses were in actual fact included, but they were before it went out to consultation, and they helped us draft the initial policy. So some of the proposed changes now. I won't go through everything. If you look through the Department of Transport standards, statutory standards, there's a lot of detail in there, and we've had to go through that and actually include each point within the policy. But the main things that come out, and it's all about public safety, but it's about doing 6 monthly DBS checks. Now, we were proposing a mandatory signing up to the update service within that. We hadn't initially said 6 months, we were going to do 12 months, but it's actually now become statutory for 6 months. So the really the requirement for the update service to do that every 6 months, that's really the only viable way of doing that effectively, and it also will benefit greatly our proposed online licensing application system, which is progressing well. Another aspect was the NR3, that's a national register for those drivers who have actually been had their license revoked or refused. And this is an indicator that there may well be some issues. So it's not a banned list as such. It's just saying there may well be something to look into a bit further here. And this is to prevent one driver who was revoked from one local authority going to another local authority and being granted a license. The National Anti-Fraud Network actually administer this. We've been registered with this for over a year now. And we are pleased to say we're in the 25% of the local authorities that have done this, and there's a big push nationally, so we're already there with it. Previous convictions, we initially followed the IOL guidance, which would see an increase in the length of time people would need to be conviction free from certain types of crimes before they'd be considered for a licence. after we drafted the policy, we then got the guidelines, and actually the IOL guidelines were virtually the same as the statutory standards. So we'd actually preempted what was going to occur from the Department of Transport. So there are other changes in there, and they're more to do with the administration, particularly of operators. But it is all about public safety and about getting those background checks to make sure that the people, the general public, are kept safe. So the proposed local changes, and I've listed them there, and I'll go through each one. And this is where we've got the responses, and this is where I've had to do a little bit of analysis. The colour was probably the most contentious of all of the proposed changes. As you can see from the Survey Monkey, the graph actually it looks it's fairly spread out, and the response numbers are quite low. And in actual fact, when you look at the response numbers, at 75% are members of the public, and the remaining are generally from the trade. The responses that when you look at the responses, they tend to be around additional cost for the taxi trade, although it was made clear in the consultation that this is for new vehicles. We're not asking for proprietors to go and respray vehicles. We realise that it's going to take a number of years, but it is about bringing that standardisation back to the trade. So we don't see that whole range of different shades of red, some of which are very, very difficult to distinguish, particularly when there's poor lighting. So it is to just bring that back up gradually to a situation where I'm sure it was envisaged when they first decided that the taxis would be red, that it would be a standard red and not the large range of shades that we have at the moment. So that's a bit of a reassurance point for many of the trade, and also the fact that we have included in the policy the possibility of wrapping a vehicle. So if someone didn't want to change a vehicle, then they could wrap it in the basic red colour. So that is probably it's one of those things where we are probably split in terms of the responses, but the reason we did include it was because of some representations that were made to us about why Darlington have lots of different coloured Hackney carriage vehicles. So that's why that was included. The next one, emissions. Now, this is something that's been debated throughout our region through our NESLEG, that's a North East Strategic Licensing Group, and also the North East Public Protection Partnership. And we all agree that we need to reduce emissions, reduce the carbon footprint, and we need to do that. We need to do it effectively by actually having an age policy. The only way we could do that was for all vehicles to be Euro 6 standard by April 2023, and that would mean that we'd have an age policy where all vehicles over 8 years would be removed from the fleet. There would be no exceptionally well-maintained aspect, and part of the reason there is some vehicles remain on fleets for a lot of years. They are polluting, they've got a lot of emissions, and the only way to do that, to bring in the Euro 6 was to have the age policy of 8 years, because all vehicles registered from 2015 would be Euro 6. But to counteract that, and it is about giving things back to the trade, because we realise things are really difficult for them. Our policy is currently any vehicle with under, it'll only be granted up to 3 years old, but we're of the opinion that up to 4 years old won't actually won't change the anything to do with the emissions, but what it will do is give more choice to the drivers, who will be able to buy a vehicle at less cost, which will be over 3 years old, which currently we wouldn't be licensing. So yes, we are asking that the vehicles removed at 8 years. Currently, it does say 6, but as I said, the exception well maintained element it means that many cars just go on and on and on. And obviously, with all of the engines are older and more polluting. And as you see from the responses from that, it was generally well received by the public and the trade. Window tints. This has been a little bit controversial in the past. However, what we did quite a lot of research before we considered this proposal. Currently, the windows, the rear window, we are talking about the rear windows here because it's statutory for light transmission in the front windows. But the rear windows, the current policy is 70% light transmission. What that means is that you can see into the vehicle. People from disability groups have said that they quite often dislike it because they feel like they're in a goldfish bowl when they sat in wheelchairs. They didn't like it. The trade didn't like it because a lot of vehicles now are manufactured with a window tint much less than 70%. And what that effectively means is you have the rear windows are darkened a little bit. What we didn't want is to have fully blacked out windows, which it's not the image that we would want to give for Darlington. But certainly from our research, there will be no impact on safety by reducing this to 30%. It also means that the trade don't have to then buy a vehicle and then have to change the glass, which is currently what they have to do at quite considerable cost. So looking at the responses, this was generally well received. Advertising. We've seen a proliferation of advertising on vehicles fairly recently. And whilst not wanting to stifle the ability for the proprietors to make some extra money by advertising, they do seem to have grown on the vehicles and not really what was envisaged. I don't know, people who have been around the town may have seen whole doors which have been wrapped in different coloured advertisement. Sometimes almost the whole of the rear vehicle looks like it's one big advertisement, which is not what it was envisaged. So our proposal is that it's only on the rear quarter panel, and that's not for the rear quarter panel to be wrapped in one colour and then an advertisement, but the actual maintain the underlying colour with just the actual advertisement on show on the rear quarter panel. And this as well was generally well received from the responses that we received. Spare wheel. We've had it in our policy for a spare wheel to be required. Again, this is additional expense for the trade. All vehicles now, no vehicles are manufactured with a spare wheel. So if anyone bought a new vehicle, they then have to make room for a spare wheel, which takes up some of the space that could be used for luggage, or maybe having to put the wheel under the vehicle in a cage, all of which is going to be extra cost to the driver. But we've got to balance that with safety, and we've been looking at the tyre sealants to be used in emergency situations, and from the research we can see no reason why that can't be the case for taxis. But I must stress, in emergency situations, we're not saying that these cars can drive around with the tyre sealants as they're repaired for the vehicle. And the vehicles do get tested, and this is something that would be checked for. So, and you can see as well the responses for that that would be received well by the public and the trade. Insurance write-offs. This is again where Darlington Borough Council have just said they won't licence any vehicles that are insurance write-offs. But we've again looked at the research. We've seen that there's been massive advances in technology over the years, and we believe that by allowing the category N, which is the category for non-structural damage, so this may well be those vehicles that might have an electrical fault, which may take quite a long time to try and diagnose. Which, if that's garage time, excuse me, if that's garage time, then it may well not be economically viable. But there are some experts, there's enthusiasts who could be able to repair these vehicles. And as long as we have it certified safe from engineers, our garage inspectors are happy with them, then we see no reason why to refuse this category. And again, it is given something for the trade, and particularly at these difficult times, where savings, where they can make savings, we will try our best to help them out. Online payments, we did put this in because we propose to have our online, all of our taxi licence and applications online. Again, that's work that's progressing quite quickly. We're hoping early next year we'll have that in place. To do that effectively, we need to have a requirement for payment online. There are those who are still quite resistant to paying online. As you can imagine, the taxi trade is a trade which works primarily with cash. However, we do need to modernise the way we work. I think people realise, particularly during the pandemic, that card payments has been the most effective way to proceed. But online payments means that we can do the end-to-end licensing process via the new software. It is a decision we can make locally. However, in the interests of transparency, we have asked licensing committee to make that decision. And in line with the online application process, we have looked at the current policy, which says that we aim to have the application processed within 6 months. We believe that was on a paper-based system, that even though most occasions the application takes a lot less time than that, we think that if we work towards a maximum of 3 months, that will be again benefit to the trade, and those difficult applications, it will mean that we won't be sitting wondering what we're going to do, but we will progress them quickly, subject to certain conditions such as availability of licensing committee and the documents that are required to be submitted. Disability awareness, we've put this in to try and future-proof, and some of the responses, as you could see, particularly from email, have been in relation to disability. We've been working with disability groups, but there's a whole range of disabilities which obviously people need to use transport. We are proposing, or we actually have a website domain where we were in the process of developing our own online training for child sex exploitation, but we also want to develop this around disability awareness. That has been put on hold because of the COVID pandemic. However, as we've bought the domain, it's something that we are developing. And once we have developed those, we would like to make these courses mandatory for the trade. But because we've developed it ourselves, the aim is to do these courses at no cost to the trade. They will be simply online, where they would have to complete the online course, and we may well link that in with the knowledge test that someone has to take before they actually become a licensed driver. So this is about future-proofing the policy, because it is work that's going to pick up quickly once we're out of these restrictions, and that's done jointly with the Tees Valley licensing authorities. CCTV, I've put this separate. You may have well seen the responses. It is supported. People would like to see CCTV in vehicles, and we're talking about the inward-facing CCTV. Those drivers that choose to have dashboard cameras for purposes if there's any accidents and things like that, that is different. But we're talking about the inward facing, so it's actually recording images of the passengers and drivers, and on occasions audio. This is not mandated by the Department of Transport. What it is advisory. Our current policy is that we do advise it, because it definitely has some safety implications, but there's also lots of other things which we need to consider, which we think to combine this within this policy review probably wouldn't serve it justice in terms of the importance. There's an awful lot of issues around civil liberties. We have issue with would be Darlington Borough Council would be the controllers, data controllers. So we'd have issues of storage of images, access of images. It would be time consuming, and whilst not trying to undermine it, we already have quite robust procedures in place for when we do get some complaints, and we as we've seen over the years, not hesitated in suspending drivers and bringing drivers to the licensing committee where it is necessary, following information that we get. So we do think that we would like to support it, but at the moment we do think that we do need to do a lot more research in relation to the impact that would have. And also a system, if we mandate it, would cost the drivers in the region of, probably the cheapest system is around £500. So you're talking about between £500 and £1,000 per driver. And again, at this time, asking drivers to pull out that money is a lot. And I don't think at the moment that we'd be compromising on safety because of our robust procedures that we already have in place. So really, to sum up, this revised policy will introduce and reinforce measures to ensure the protection of the general public, and in particular children and vulnerable adults, and to provide an enforcement framework that takes account of legislative changes and amendments, whilst providing encouragement and support to the taxi trade in the borough. So, Chair, I would recommend to the Licensing Committee, it's requested to support this draft of the taxi licensing policy for approval by full council. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Over to you, members. Any questions, please? Nobody indicating to speak. Oh, somebody is.
Yeah,
Hang on.
Chair,
Oh,
we have a number of hands up.
Councillor Snedden now. Councillor Snedden, you wish to speak?
Yes, yeah, thank you very much. I do have 2 points, but if I just take one at a time, and because other members may want to contribute on this as well. I think the topic of colour, as Colin mentioned, was one that I've heard representations from, and obviously it's a difficult topic. The point that was made to me, even when I explained that, oh, sorry, getting some noise over, someone's got the microphone open. The comment that I'd reassured taxi drivers that it only referred to new vehicles, and I think that allayed some fears. But the concern was that by limiting it to Pantone 485, there would be manufacturers who didn't produce cars in that colour, and therefore the choice of cars available to the taxi trade was drastically reduced. They might not be able to get the vehicles that they preferred, or when they went to market to buy a car, their choice would be limited. So I was wondering if it was possible for us to consider some compromise. Currently, the word red has to appear on, I think, the logbook. Colin knows far more than he's nodding. Good. And the word red is incredibly broad as far as the DVLA is concerned. I was wondering, having just looked at some Pantone charts myself, there are Pantone 711 and Pantone 185, which are incredibly close to what we call the Royal Mail 485 colour. And I was wondering if it would be possible for officers to consider producing a narrower definition than the current red, which includes cars which to me look brown, to be honest, at night, but not as restrictive as Ferrari red, as the Northern Echo chose to call it. So I'd wondered if members had any thoughts on that.
Councillor Jones, I had to mute you because there was some toast. Thank you.
Colin, would you like to reply to that, please?
Yeah, that certainly. We did look at the Pantone chart before. There are a lot of subtle differences between some of the colours, and I accept entirely what you're saying. And I think it would be feasible to have those that are within a close range of that Pantone colour specified in the policy. I would say that before we specified that in the proposed policy, we did look at the manufacturers, the main manufacturers of vehicles, and they do produce them as the standard red. So most vehicles are the standard red, but where you start to look at some of the more luxury vehicles, they do deviate more from the standard red, such as some of the Mercedes vehicles that we've seen. So yeah, we can certainly look at that. It is, like I say, we did look at it before. It's how far we want to go with that and what would be considered reasonable. But we're certainly open to suggestions and look at the chart and see if some further colours which closely match the standard red could be included. Yes.
Thank you, Colin. Your second question, Councillor Snedker.
Oh, thank you. The second question was regarding the proposed 25% discount in fees for vehicles depending on their power. We were proposing a 25% discount on 4 classes of vehicles: LPG, hydrogen, electric, and petrol hybrid electric vehicles. Obviously, I approve of the idea of incentivising moving to cleaner vehicles. I think it's and that taken into account with the age change that's come through on Euro 6. My concern is that the self-charging hybrids are fairly minimal in their saving, because it basically is you're looking around a petrol generator inside an electric car, and the amount of miles or kilometres driven under purely electric seems to be in the real world very low. and taxi drivers may well be using the petrol as much as any before, but it might be a stepping stone. So, and the other one is we're now seeing real world figures for petrol hybrid vehicles coming through, and I think we're all familiar with VW getting their fingers burnt by promising something that wasn't true. And we're seeing that real world figures have pollution 4 times higher than industry figures. And the most recent survey I saw showed that as little as 20% of miles are actually driven on electric. And so the amount of reduction in emissions in the town centre would be quite low. And so my proposal would be a consideration of a stepped reduction in fees that acknowledged that all electric vehicles are very good at reducing pollution. Hybrid vehicles do have a reduction, and self-charging vehicles have a minimal reduction, and whether they would be worth incentivising, something that I would like considering. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Would you like to comment?
Yeah. Appreciate everything that's been said there. I think what we really have to consider here, these we talk about incentives. It is a slight incentive, but it nowhere at the moment, because of the cost of particularly full electric vehicles. I saw something maybe over £10,000 more than a petrol engine of the same. The incentive is probably quite minimal, if I'm honest. It may well help a little bit, but the actual outlay of the vehicles nowhere compensates for the extra that they're going to have to pay for that. I mean, ideally, we would like to see emission-free vehicles. We're talking largely about electric vehicles, and we are seeing a lot more. But we've also got to consider the charging points. We still haven't got the high-speed charging points, so people are still reluctant to invest, particularly in the taxi trade, where they may well get a fare that will take them quite a distance. They've got to consider how long they're going to be away from a charging point. And the other thing to consider as well is those people who wish to charge the vehicle at home on a night time, they would require a charging point, and those people maybe lived in a terrace house or have off-street, on-street parking, wouldn't be able to trail an electric cable across the footpaths. So I think there's an awful lot of work to do in relation to incentivising those to bring down the emissions, and really. It's a small amount, but I think there needs to be a lot more investment before the trade start to be thinking about buying expensive vehicles. And it may well be those that do want them still can't have them because they've got no way of charging the vehicle, particularly overnight.
Thank you, Colin. Councillor Snedker, appreciate your comments, but I think this is one to look for in the future when the type of vehicles which become more available will be increased, hopefully, over the years. One perhaps for the future, for the interim view we'll take in 3 years' time. Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. My question's the same as Councillor Snedker's in regard to the colour, the Pantone 485. And while I completely would support becoming more uniform, I think it would become quite restrictive for the trade, and I think that's reflected in the survey, where generally members of the public appear to be supporting that change, but members of the trade generally are disagreeing with that. And I did a desktop exercise just to see how easy it would be to purchase a car with that particular colour, and I found it incredibly difficult. For example, Skoda, which is a very popular make of car for the taxi trade, only do one colour red, it would appear. I don't know whether that's Pantone 485. I couldn't find that information. It doesn't say Pantone 485. calls it something else. But I think we're also at risk of a popular manufacturer like that suddenly changing their colour across the whole range of cars, which means that the taxi trade can no longer, or it's got an extra cost to the taxi trade if they want to have that particular brand of car. And I think I found that similar in other car manufacturers. Vauxhall, for example, I think a very limited range of colour shades of red. Also, I was quite surprised by how unpopular the colour red appears to be now amongst car manufacturers, and within certain manufacturers, certain cars aren't available in the colour red at all. So I think it would become quite restrictive, and I would certainly support Councillor Snedker's the proposal that we broaden that the range of colour shades. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Colin, would you like to answer?
Again, yeah, I take that fully on board. We'll look at that Pantone colour chart, and we can look at a range of colours that would be hopefully acceptable to the licensing committee and the trade. It was always going to be controversial.
Is it about the parents? Oh, okay.
Sorry, somebody's interrupting Colin. I don't know what's going on there. Carry on, Colin. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Just saying. It's certainly we can look at agreeing a range which doesn't take us into the sort of almost brown colours, and we can certainly be pragmatic about this. But it was always going to be the probably the most controversial element of the proposed policy. Hartlepool had exactly the same situation because they use a yellow. That's a non-standard colour, and that generated far more responses in their policy review last year. So it was expected.
Well, we are discussing the draft policy, so we can presumably make amendments before it goes to council. Moving on, Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. I actually would like to comment on not something that is contained within the report, but something that is missing, and I'm disappointed that it's missing. You'll recall at our meeting on the 29th of July, this committee voted in favor of mandating face coverings in taxis for passengers and also for drivers. On the 5th of November, our government in England, they have also mandated face coverings in taxis. In Scotland and in Wales, this decision was taken months ago. And in most civilized countries affected by the pandemic, this decision was taken months ago. So I'm disappointed that we didn't take the opportunity to consult with the public and with the trade in relation to face coverings. And I think we've missed a really vital opportunity. And I'll give you just some examples. In relation to the Code of Good Conduct for licensed drivers, we could have very easily put in there, be aware of and be compliant with public health advice, something like that. The final annex, staying safe, guidance for passengers. It would have been really useful, in my opinion, for the protection of the public, which is supposedly our main aim of this committee, to include a line like that, to remind people that they have a duty to comply with public health advice and guidance. So in relation to that, I'm very disappointed because although, thank goodness, we have great news about a possible vaccine coming into to use fairly soon, I think that as a licensing committee, we should have something like that within our actual licensing rules. Maybe not something that it would expect. I know the guidance says the police can take measures if they see passengers not wearing masks in taxis. I wouldn't expect that kind of draconian approach unless it was really vital. But just to include that kind of basic common sense advice within our licensing conditions. Thank you, Chair. And really, it's just I'm seeking comment from Colin on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Colin?
Yeah, in relation to the face coverings, as you're aware, there was an awful lot of work going on nationally, and it was felt at that time that the legislation and all the guidelines there were sufficient to deal with that constantly moving part. The taxi trade, in actual fact, there was very, very mixed responses, and we're talking about some of the problems the trade themselves were saying that they were having in terms of either wearing face coverings themselves or trying to enforce people who were getting into taxis, particularly in the nighttime economy, who were intoxicated and potentially creating issues for them if they were confronted. And how do they, if once they're in the taxi, how do they get them out if they won't wear face coverings? So there's a lot of issues going around the taxi trade at that time, and it was felt that there was a lot of work going on nationally. We wanted to see it mandated, have the legislation quite early on, and even when the legislation came in about face coverings with for passengers being mandatory, they still made it discretional for the drivers. But I agree, yeah, we could put something in. It's not too late to actually add something in about put a condition on in relation to the code of conduct from the driver. But we do know that the legislation and all of the work around public health was going on at that time, but because it was such a constantly changing environment, yeah, it didn't go in, and we can put it in about put that condition in. Yeah.
Thank you, Colin. Pleased to hear that. I think that it's all very well having drunks who will no doubt argue the toss, but I don't think you can let them dictate for the rest of the public if there's a safety issue. I'm sure you'll agree, Councillor Hughes. Thank you for that. Councillor Lee.
I would agree, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to mention the red paid, but I think Councillor Snetka and Councillor Scott have covered that very, very well. So I won't really dwell on that. I will, however, talk about the environmental considerations. Looking from page 57, which deals with environmental considerations, I am a little disappointed that the whole thing, the whole policy on environment is relatively so weak, given that the council have agreed across the board that we should be reducing our carbon to net zero by 2050 with a lot of pressure, well, not a lot of pressure, with an emphasis on trying to bring it down as much as we can by 2030. I'm a little disappointed that we have no forward planning in this policy at all towards moving from fossil fueled vehicles into vehicles which are not as pollutant. Just to give you some basic idea, we have 251 vehicles on the road, and if those vehicles do an average of 30,000 miles, which isn't, I would suggest, isn't particularly high for a taxi, we're looking at 7.5 million travelled miles being done every year, which over the next 10 years is equivalent to 75 million miles. It's an astronomical figure, and in each mile, we are pumping out carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide into the atmosphere. And that's simply from our little borough of Darlington. So then when we look at the incentives, which I know it's been dwelt on already, we're talking about a 25% decrease in the license, a 25% decrease in a taxi and a taxi license is about a £40 a year saving, which on the second and successive years is reduced to £19 saving. So there's nothing there which will encourage anyone to go out and pay, as Colin said, another £10,000 towards electrical or hybrid vehicle. So surely it's time that now that we are looking, now that we have got a policy and an agreement to reduce our carbon to net zero, that within this taxi licensing policy, we ought to have a proper forward-looking program whereby we would be informing taxi drivers and private hire drivers that within a certain amount of time we would expect the vehicles to have disappeared from the road. Now I'm talking about a minimum of 10 years. 10 years is a long time, from now till 2030, which again is to try and aim and hit the target which most councillors last year agreed to. So I would like Colin to comment on that as to why we haven't done it, why we haven't, and also obviously it's not in the foreseeable future either, but we do need to get this to grips. Now, as has been said by Colin, there are many, many reasons why we can't do things, but the emphasis now has got on not so much why we can't do it, how can we do it? There isn't any ifs and buts and pots and pans. We've got a problem with carbon, we've got a problem, a target to hit, and every department within the local authority must be aiming towards that. And the only way we can as councillors, can see how we are progressing is to actually have a plan whereby we can look forward over a period of time to see this target succeeded. And in there's nothing to it. I refer also to the comment on paragraph 237. We spoke, Colin, you and I, earlier this year about vehicles switching their engines off. Now, the expression which we've got, which I think follows through the whole policy on the environment, is, and I shall read, clearly emissions from hackney carriage and private hire vehicles could be reduced further by encouraging better maintenance and switching off engines. It's all this, not will, but it could be, it may be, it's suggested. And I think it's time we tightened up on that. I mean, I just do wonder how many of our taxi drivers and private hire drivers are aware of paragraph 237, which is on page 58 of a document which is 300 pages long. No disrespect, Colin, but I don't think many taxi drivers would be reading this document either. So the point I'm trying to make is that as a council, we have signed up to net zero carbon for 2050. As a council, as council laws, we have emphasised the need to try and bring this earlier. And the date of 2030 has been set. Within this document, it has totally ignored that, and it is, do we not feel that it is only right that there should be some reference made to the objectives set by the council and an introduction within the policy to take us by a step over the next 10, 12 years, whereby in that period of time, the changes have been made, and not leave it up to the taxi drivers to implement as and when it suits them. Give it 10 years, I would suggest, is a long period of time for which they can plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. I'd like to comment on that because I think similar to the comments we had before, it's early days in terms of vehicles which are available to reduce these pollutants. They are not by no means perfect, and there's a lot of work to be done. And not only that, the cost to the taxi drivers and the taxi trade would be irrecoverable in some cases, and I'm really not sure the way forward. I think that we review this policy every 5 years, and perhaps in 5 years' time, it's not too late then to look at it again. But for the moment, can I pass over to you, please, Colin?
Just in relation to, there's certainly things that we can do things better, particularly campaigns. We can certainly look at some of the media campaigns that we run to get these messages out, particularly about switching engines off, which I totally understand. Get that message out to the drivers. We have tried, but events overtook this year, so messages didn't go out in the way that we'd like them to have gone out. But in relation to the emissions generally, we've actually we're going along hopefully with what the Northeast region is trying to achieve, and it is in them steps, and Euro 6 being mandatory by 2023 is the first step. Hopefully technology will move on at quite a pace over the next few years, and we work within the Northeast Public Protection Partnership closely as well, and they're very much taking the lead in how we use and licensing to progress the issue of emissions, and we are part of that. We're part of the working group in relation to charging points, which we're trying to improve. So there is work ongoing, and I can certainly put some wording in, particularly in the introduction, that we want to work towards that. But it is very much a work in progress regionally and nationally in relation to the emissions.
Thank you, Colin. I have nobody else indicating for questions.
Chair,
Alison,
I think we have.
say anything? Any
Yeah,
hands
we
up?
have Councillor Hughes and Councillor Scott have still got their hands up. Thank you.
Thank you. All down. I think we had Councillor Hazeldown, but he's left the meeting. Okay, all done. The recommendation is that we are requested to support the draft of the taxi licensing policy for approval to full council, and I would add that that's in consideration of red cars to be looked at, face masks to be looked at, and emissions to be considered for the future. Can we take a vote on that, please? Can you raise your hands or give me some indication? 2, 3. I've got 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's approved. Thank you. Thank you. That's approved. And there's no other business. So with that, I'll close the meeting and thank you all very much for your attendance and your input. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.